Welcome to the Open Treasury podcast, your go-to source for the latest news and analysis in corporate cash and treasury management. This show is brought to you by CTMfile.com and the Treasury News Network, where Treasury professionals learn and share the information that matters most. And now your host, Jack Large.
Hello and welcome to our Open Treasury podcast. I'm here again with Craig Jeffery, Managing Partner, Strategic Treasurer, and we're going to be reviewing the important Treasury topics that we've covered in the last 2 weeks. Craig, the most important one in the last 2 weeks is that Libor has finally ended after many, many years of dominating global trade. It's proved, I'm quite surprised about how relatively easy it's been to adopt things like SOFR and SONIA from the different countries and the different schemes around the world. Corporate Treasury seems to have taken it in its stride, hasn't it? I was quite surprised.
For a reference rate that's really been the reference rate for nearly 35 years, the transition hasn't been too bad, but to some extent, it's been like a duck moving smoothly on the surface, a lot of paddling underneath with system changes. There's been a period of time to make that change. I think if it was done in a precipitous manner, it would look a little different. But you're right, it has been very smooth as we, no longer add them into existing new agreements. There's been some, grace extended for agreements that lack fallback language to use another rate. Like, who would have anticipated 20 years ago that there wouldn't be Libor? So if there's no fallback language for another rate, there's still time, in certain jurisdictions to let that extend for multiple years.
Don't let me not give you the impression that I don't think problems are still going to come, because there are still loads of contracts with Libor in. It's just that they haven't reached the point at which it has to change. But that'll happen over the next few years. Relatively good success story, I thought. The other thing that we covered was BNY Mellon looking forward for 2022, and they had an important article about the future of global capital markets. I thought it was a rather neat description of the position as we move forward. I think this will become a classic article to refer to in the future. Is there going to be as much change as they think there is there? Because these 6 areas are quite big.
That's my view as well. A couple of these items, the democratization of public markets, the blurring of public and private markets, this idea of private companies remain private longer, some even revert to private. These are pretty significant items. I think they're right in these areas. There's a couple areas that might be a bit more speculative. You may say, is this a fit, like concerns about data and cybersecurity? How does that fit with the future of global capital markets? And if you see the rate of growth and change, they may be onto something there. Same thing with the ESG and reporting. These are some very large systematic external influences that have a feedback loop into global capital markets. So it's very interesting read to see where things are going. If they're right on 4 of these, that's awesome. If they're right on all 6, that'll be a significant work that they've done.
And the point about data is emerging as its own asset class, and the management infrastructure of data, a key area for firms, and they're really talking to themselves in a way, but also data is emerging as value on its own, almost like an asset class. It's going to be interesting how that plays out. So if we move on to the other major thing that emerged from Strategic Treasury and CTMfile in the last 2 weeks is the beginnings of a series of articles on leading practices in corporate treasury. The first one on bank account management opened quite a few doors in terms of understanding what's going on, and raised quite a few issues in terms of the whole topic of bank account management and the management of liquidity and so on. I look forward to this series because this has been needed for quite a while. What's been the reaction to the first article, do you think?
We've seen comments on social media and a few other places. People have contacted us about it. They're pretty interested in it. I think it is an exciting series. If we look at different leading practices and combine them with different news and research that happens. So the issue on bank account management is it's something everyone is pretty familiar with, but there's a lot of foundational activities that aren't done well on a consistent basis across all organizations, whether it's the bank account structure, the controls of signers and services, ways of validating items. This is foundational for the protection of and management of Treasury, and it's not always done. And so this is, I think it's both timely, and there's an aspect that it fits into the CTMfile, the cash and treasury management file definition, where there's something you can go back to over time. So those are things that are exciting to me. What are some of your thoughts on that?
For me, the biggest reminder in the article is actually how backward quite a few companies are in terms of their management of bank accounts. You'd have thought this would have been solved in the early 90s, but we've still got companies that are not knowing their full real-time position, and increasingly it's needing to know your real-time position because there are more and more clearings around the world which are real-time or almost real-time, and it's changing the way people have to think about bank accounts. I think this article is important, and we'll see how the series pans out, but the emphasis on practical solutions, I think, is really important.
I think it also ties into this concept of Treasury as the owner of cash. And as a subset of that, one aspect is bank accounts, bank account management, and then a number of the other things that are going to come through this series as that's rolled out over the coming weeks and months.
And it's a good way to start a new year. And hopefully we get rid of the impact of the pandemic, minimized, but I'm not convinced about that. Anyway, enough of my depression. So looking forward now for 2022, the year opening out, what would be your major things that you would like to highlight in this coming year?
So looking forward, maybe just a quick look back. I penciled a few things down. One on technology. To me, 2021 was a significant year for API adoption, and I think 2022 will continue that strength. But I think what may replace it in the news by the end of the year is either machine learning or analytics on the technology front. There's a couple other tech items that'll probably be 2023 big news items in terms of growth and adoption. But I'm focused on technology, API, and then handing off the baton to machine learning and analytics.
Yeah, for me, the things that are going to change in 2022 are increasing regulation and monitoring. Everybody will say, oh, no, not even more. But actually, some of it is really important, like the real-time monitoring of the ESG supply chain all the way across the supply chain, which was shown by Prima Dollar and their real-time monitoring of working practices across the supply chain. That's a good indication of how increasingly I think we're going to get more and more real-time monitoring of all sorts of key factors. And it's going to change the way I think we think about supply chains and the way we think about digitization. And out of that comes the other big thing for me, which is that the management of the overall automation process is starting to be examined in great detail. We've got a wonderful web chat coming up, hopefully in the next week or so, on how to manage automation this web chat from Deutsche examines the very basics of managing automation. And I think that's going to be one of the problems that treasurers are going to keep coming forward to. It ties in with your increasing use of APIs, increasing use of machine learning and so on. It's bringing all those processes together and managing them as a whole is the key problem that I see has got to be tackled in 2022. Do you have any more comments before we close?
No, Jack. Happy New Year to you and yours.
And to you and all our readers and listeners, wherever they are.
This podcast is provided for informational purposes only, and statements made by Strategic Treasurer LLC on this podcast are not intended as legal, business, consulting, or tax advice. For more information, visit and bookmark strategictreasurer.com.